Sergeant Lawrence Dean Tucker, United States Army, Vietnam. Sergeant Tucker served in Vietnam from 67 to 68. He was drafted at the age of 19, and he went to basic training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, went to advanced training Fort Polk, Louisiana, went through jungle warfare training, and he went to Vietnam, served as a corporal in a squad, over a squad, and then became a sergeant in Vietnam. And he served with the 1st Cavalry, folks, the infamous 1st Cavalry, 2nd of the 7th Delta Company, 2nd Platoon. And Lawrence gave me lots of pictures of himself in Vietnam. You're going to see some of them after this introduction. I love the pictures. They really tell the story. And it's so nostalgic. You know, Vietnam now is like a long time ago. And it's like when I started my work with the World War II veterans 20 years ago this month, this year actually, in March of this year. The World War II veterans were in their late 70s, early 80s, almost the same age as a lot of our Vietnam veterans today. So I sensed an urgency about my work to record these stories before it's too late. Like I said in a previous broadcast, that 80% of the burials here at our Veterans Cemetery are Vietnam vets now. You don't see many World War II or Korea vets because most of them are gone. Folks, so I'm so glad I got Lawrence Tucker's story. Lawrence Dean Tucker. God bless you for telling me your story. It was in Abington, Virginia, September 7th, 2008. I was on a 10-day tour back in that part of the country. Ended up in Columbus, Ohio at a Battle of the Bulge reunion. And just have great memories of my time with Lawrence Tucker and his family. So I want to thank Stephen Russo for sponsoring this story. Stephen, you become a sponsor of mine, and I thank you. You're a monthly sponsor. God bless you, sir. God bless you. Thank you for your heart for my work. Steve calls me, we email, we text. He's just a great guy. I had somebody say, you stay in touch with your sponsors. Of course I do. I love my sponsors. You know, those are the ones who are stepping forward and making all this possible, folks. I've done the interviews. I've done that over the years. Now I need help getting these out on the air. And Stephen's been one of these supportive people. And God bless you, Stephen, and your family. I hope to meet you soon and shake your hand one day, sir. And I want you to feel good about this. This is a great story. Folks, if you'd like to sponsor a story like Stephen has, you can find information in the video description below the video or on my website, larrycapetto.com. Click on Sponsor a Vet. See all these beautiful, wonderful pictures of my veterans. Find one that you like. Include their name in the sponsorship, and I'll do the rest. And I'll mention you right here. Amen. God bless you. All right. Thank you. And if you want to donate to my work too, you can donate in the comments section. Just click on Donate, and you can send a donation in, and I would greatly appreciate that. It'll go to, you take ownership in this work. It's just a feel-good project, folks. So I look in the camera to all you that have been commenting on my videos over the years, the months and the years now I've been doing this. Thank you. Thank you. I know where you're at across the country. I know where you're at. And I just thank you that you've been supportive of my work by watching these videos, hopefully sharing them too. So I got a full heart, folks. I'm going out interviewing more Vietnam vets this year. They're coming to me. I'm going to them. It's a wonderful experience that is happening again. I haven't been out interviewing actively for several years, so I'm ready. I'm going to start here locally and work my way out. And I had an organization contact me recently that wants me to come fly in one of their Huey helicopters, an original Huey helicopter that took these combat troops in and out of battle, that medevac the wounded in Vietnam, the workhorse of Vietnam. And by the way, my Vietnam Remembered film is my most watched film on my YouTube channel. It's had over 3 million views, so watch it if you haven't watched it. So I may put it at the end of this video, but I want to ride in that Huey. It's going to be in September. It's going to be in Iowa, so if you're anywhere in that area, I can give you more information if you'd like, but I'm going to ride it on a Huey helicopter with Huey pilots. Some of them are Vietnam pilots, with some of my Vietnam veterans that you've watched on these YouTube channel. I was going to mention their names. I don't know if it matters. You know, those that have said that they're going to come or are thinking about coming. Lee Alley, Lieutenant Alley from Wyoming. Jerry McNelly. You guys have watched this story. One of the most watched stories I've got on Vietnam. He's in Arizona. Stuart Simonson in the Algona, Iowa area is going to come. And who am I missing? Jim Miller. He served with Lieutenant Alley in Vietnam. Okay, folks, a little extended introduction here, but sometimes I just got to do a little housekeeping. But I'm really excited about the Huey ride. Oh, can you imagine going up there with these guys that flew on these choppers? Every time I hear a helicopter, just like the Vietnam vets, I look out the window. I hear the sound of those rotors and that blade, and It just does something inside of me, even though I was never in Vietnam. I've interviewed so many veterans, I feel like I've been there. I've jumped out of those helicopters. Amen. God bless you. All right, folks, that's it for now. Keep watching and subscribe to this channel. Share these videos, and let's keep this thing going. God bless you. In the Army?
Yes, and...
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
No, I was drafted. I turned 19 on July the 28th of 1966. And then the first 2 weeks of August, I was drafted just right after I turned 19.
And were you aware of Vietnam at the time and your friends were going to Vietnam? How did you feel about going into the military?
Well, I know the draft was going on pretty heavy because I'd run off from home about 16 years old and went to Davenport, Iowa. And I registered for the draft there and worked up until I was almost 19. And I'd registered there, and then I come home to Tennessee, and within 2 weeks, I got drafted. So.
And where'd you go to your basic training, Dean?
I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
And your MOS?
Is 11B40.
Infantry?
Infantry.
So at what point did you end up in Vietnam, and was it right after basic, or when did you go to Vietnam?
Well, when I had my basic training at Fort Campbell, they took us straight to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and it's usually called AIT, Advanced Infantry, you know, but this was jungle warfare training. It was just nothing but fixed up like Vietnamese. They had basic trainees dressed up in black pajamas, and they put us out in the woods with maybe something to eat, but you have to cook it. On survival, learn how to survive. And then they turn you loose out there, and then they, at nighttime, and they turn these basic trainees with Viet Cong suits on, and we hid out there and was trying to keep them getting captured. And when they did, well, they had these trainees coming beating through the grass at Fort Polk. And we thought we'd hid out pretty good, and then all of a sudden, here come two big armadillos and run right by us, and one of them squalled real big. Well, then they caught us and put us in they had a concentration camp like you would be in Vietnam. And they put this one boy in a barrel, 55-gallon drum, put a lid on it, and beat on it with a hammer. And then they took him out, and he gave his name, rank, and serial number. And then they stuck him back in there and beat on it again. And when he come out this time, he spilled his guts. He told everything. I mean, from his mother's name to everything he could. And I just thought, well, I'm next. but just so happened they didn't put me in there, but we was in the camp. We'd got caught.
Well, let's go back now. When you first got to Vietnam, what did you experience as far as the country, the geography? Was it what you thought it would be, the weather? I mean, tell me about when you first arrived in Vietnam.
Well, I didn't know really what to expect because they told us mostly when we went in AIT that you're replacements for Vietnam, so we knew where we were going from all the training. It was jungle warfare training. And so when we landed, I believe it was An Khê. That was the base for the 1st Cavalry. So they called out, and we had about 6 or 7 guys that we'd run up with in the same area in East Tennessee, like in Fall Branch and Kingsport, Johnson City, and me around Gray. And we'd got to be good buddies, and then through the training, and then when they got to An Khê, they started calling out where you was going. So that's where some went to the Big Red One, different one of them went, and then there was 2 of us went to the 1st Cavalry Division. And that's where they took us, and then they flew us out to one of the LZs, I believe it was LZ Betty, and as a new guy, because our unit had just been hit, I believe in December, and got quite a few killed. And they had come back to Phan Thiet in Vietnam. It's a province of Bien Hoa, I believe it's Bien Hoa province. And Phan Thiet was like more of a fishing place where they fished. And we stayed there for a little bit and pulled guard, and they would take us out in the helicopters and hunt like for 8, 10, 12 days, just drop us off. Sometimes we could land and jump out of the helicopter. Sometimes if it was up over top of the trees, we'd propel down a rope and you'd slide down it. And so I didn't know really what to expect. But after a few times like that, going in, especially when they had sprayed Agent Orange on all the trees, and the trees was done, the leaves was done dead, and it was just dry leaves. And when the front helicopters, the gunners would start shooting, they'd prep the area before we went in with these rockets on the side. And most of the time it would set it afire, or there'd be smoke, and then we'd be propelled down a rope. And if you'll notice a lot of pictures of Vietnam soldiers, they'll have a green towel around their neck. And that towel, a lot of times, when we was propelling, we tried to hold it around their mouth or nose to keep from breathing that ash and that smoke, because it had just been freshly sprayed with the Agent Orange to kill that foliage. And then we'd slide down and try to take up a position to set up a perimeter. Whoever went down first, whatever company or platoon, or sometimes it may be one platoon go out, sometimes it may be a company, sometimes it may be 2 companies. And then we'd set a perimeter till everybody got in, and then a lot of that old smoke and stuff, and sometimes you was under fire and sometimes you wasn't. So then you just, after everybody got down, and the captain and the colonel or whoever's there, they would set up our march, where we was going.
What year were you over in Vietnam?
I went over February the 2nd of 1967, and I come home February the 2nd of 1968.
Okay, you're with the 2nd of the 7th?
2nd and 7th.
Now, wasn't that the outfit that fought at the Ia Drang Valley in '65 with Elmore and the whole bit?
Yeah, and they lost a lot of men in Ia Drang Valley at LZ X-Ray, and the meeting I met with the 61st anniversary of the 1st Cav at Fort Jackson, the last of June. I found out a whole lot about people that was actually in Ia Drang Valley in the battle.
Mm-hmm. Did Did you see the movie?
I didn't see the movie, no, as a lot of my wife don't like for me to watch a lot of Vietnam movies. And
Well, I agree. I mean, so you were in '67. You're in Vietnam. What's your rank at that time?
I was I was a private.
Do you remember the first time you encountered combat? You engaged the enemy. Can you tell me about that? Where you were and what was happening?
Yeah, at first I didn't know exactly the date. I knowed I got there February the 2nd, but it was on March the 6th, March the 15th, that we was at station. We was pulling guard for LZ, Virginia, and they sent my squad, 7 of us, out into a little out, and there's a village maybe just a few clicks out from the LZ, and they was kids. We could hear kids talking and playing, and people was out at the village. And then all of a sudden, in this dry creek bed, we heard a dog barking. Well, and then all of a sudden we heard somebody say, go, shh, like he was trying to get that dog to be quiet. Well, we got to looking, and there was a Viet Cong down there. And there was a couple of us on one side of the creek bed and 3 or 4 others on the other. Well, he ran up out of there while they shot and killed him. And that was my first one that I had seen killed, and that was March 15th. And then when we went up to see him, and when he'd run up on the creek bank, and the medic, which we was new, hadn't been there but just a month and maybe a week, maybe 5 weeks, and the medic pulled out a .45, and he knowed that 2 of us was new, had just got there, and he said, here's what you do to him. And he took the .45 and he was already dead, but he stuck the .45 pistol down and just shot it. It just splattered his head, and that was the first time really I'd seen death. And it just to see how hardened sometimes, I guess after you're there a while, and I learned that after a while you become kind of hardened to it. But at first, when you hadn't been there but a month and you see somebody's head blowed all to pieces, then it starts bothering. But that was the first.
Now, you said you walked point?
I walked point. At that time, I wasn't a walking point. I was carrying M16. And the M16 is bad to jam at that time. They were having problems with the M16. But we come back to the base, and they told us what a good job we done and everything, but the next day, they sent us same ones back to the same place. Well, when we walked out there was no kids, there was nobody out around the village, and we was approaching the village, and there was graves. They bury their people in mounds. The mounds stick up above the ground. And there was a big haystack and stuff there, and I told the squad leader, I said, I believe there's something wrong. I said, there's no kids, there's no people out, and there's something wrong. And we was scattered on the line, formation going in. And just about that time, it was in the daytime, but you could see we come under fire. So all we could do was just get down where we was at. And I got down behind that big haystack and the other boy, Roger Hoosier, got behind a little tree, and the others scattered out. And then when it was over, they called in, or while we called in mortars, and they called it in real close to us, and then when we got one killed in. So Roger, one of my good friends, was killed, and that was March the 16th. I found out later. And he's from Campbellsville, Kentucky. And I'll never forget, but that was the first one of our guys that I ever seen killed.
Can you, I know you guys are trained for this stuff, but I mean, when you actually experience it, is it different than your training? Is it what you thought it would be, or is it just, you mentioned getting hardened after a while. Is it a process of time? But I mean, when you first see that, it shakes you up.
Yeah, well, I think because I thought I was scared in jungle warfare training, them out there beating around trying to find us. I thought that was kind of scary, but they was doing it for our own good, prepare us for stuff what we just like we run into. That you're not going to be, war is, like they say war is hell. And when you're 19 years old and you've been raised out on the farm and ain't hardly been nowhere, but and then all of a sudden you're dropped off in the jungle and say, here you are, you make the best of it. And then it's either kill or you be killed. And you're fighting people that's, some of them probably your age or older, some of them younger. Some of them you might have known who you was fighting, some of them you didn't. You didn't know who your enemy was. It might be some woman out there in a rice paddy out there digging or something, other kid.
Tell me about the Huey helicopters. Were you used to go into landing zones, and did you ever land in a hot LZ, and what was the situation like?
Yeah, we've landed, that's how we got out on all of our missions. Like I say, we would come back to the different LZs and maybe stay a week pulling guard for artillery. They had a base set up. LZ Betty was one of the main ones. It was next to Fayette, and it was an old French buildings, and that's where the headquarters was for the 2nd and 7th. And but the others was on out into the flatlands, and one was up on top of a mountain, LZ Bartley. But what they would do, they would say, you're going out on a mission, search and destroy, and we'd pack up so many sea rations, pack up, and they'd fly us out. Sometimes it may be your one platoon, sometimes it may be your company, like I was in Delta Company, and I was in the 2nd platoon, and they'd fly you out and just say, this is where we're going to hunt. They've been reports of Viet Cong or whatever, you would just go. So sometimes the helicopter would hover maybe 8, 10 feet, and sometimes some of them, there's a couple seats. Most of the time you sit on the floor with your feet sitting right on the skids. And you hovered right there and you just jumped off. And you better get off quick and get you a place to lay down, because there may be 4 choppers coming in and dumping them off. And every time they dump, maybe 4 to 5 GIs off, well, then we make a perimeter and set up, and then maybe the captain, he'd set up in the middle and they get their directions what they were going to do. And then, like I say, sometimes it'd be where you could jump off, sometimes you'd be propel. And but November of 19, I know it was November, and I know it was close to Thanksgiving, and that was, I couldn't remember anything after that when I come home or while I was in Vietnam. But through Orlando Salazar, and he lives in California, San Diego, and I found his website, and he had this battle wrote from a Cavalry paper, and I've got a copy of it, and it described the 18-hour battle, and what they'd done. They set my platoon down what they thought was 2 or 3 Viet Cong, and then they let a couple ships, helicopters, land, and then they started shooting, and we were pinned down. and as my platoon, then they started bringing in more of my company, and then they found out there was more and more fire, so they ended up like A company and B company come, and they set them in so close they couldn't get to us, and my platoon was pinned down and couldn't get out because they'd set them. They let us sit down into the middle of them, and I could see I was back just behind a dike, and there was a couple of guys behind these big ant hills, and some of them be 6, 8, 10 foot tall, and they was hiding behind it. And but there was one that would he could pick you off. So the sergeant, one of them come out and told me, and another guy said, take your web gear off and crawl out and get them guys that was shot. We could see them laying out there. This was up probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the evening. And we did, but as soon as we tried to stick our head over that dike, why, they would fire, dirt fly at our face. And so we couldn't go get them. And we laid there and laid there and laid there, and the rest of the companies had come in. And but this Cavalry, this paper, run the article in January, I think, after this. And it tells how many was, I think there was about 6 or 8 killed out of my platoon, and out of D company, and then there was 2 out of A company, and I believe 2 out of B company, and about 36 wounded. And they seemed they couldn't get us out. So what they did, they called in the airstrikes, napalm, and they just figured, well, most of our platoon was mostly all dead, but they dropped them 500-pound big bombs with the napalm, and it would lift you plumb off the ground. And so then we laid there all night, and next day, we picked up, and they had done come in and drug theirs off, I guess, because we didn't find hardly any of their people, the Viet Cong. And then the people that was laying there, our guys, was burnt like charcoal logs. And we were taught mostly to, if we found anybody that was dead, ours killed, we tied a rope or something to the leg and pull them, because they were bad about putting a hand grenade under them and pulling a pin on it. And I pulled this one guy, and he'd been laying there, and the ground was just like snow, just puffy with the napalm. And I pulled him, and when I pulled him out, pulled him back, he was laying face down into the New Testament. And that bared with me, so he knowed his time, but he had been a reading in the New Testament, and he was burnt black all over the back, but his face was still, in the Bible, was still laying there, not burnt. And then we went through and picked up the pieces and the parts of what was left. But one guy that come out behind that anthill after they'd been there for probably 3 or 4 hours, he come out with 2 hand grenades, pulled the pins on them, and come out behind that anthill and tried to run toward that foxhole or wherever that Viet Cong was shooting. All we could know is raising his head up, and he tried to run toward that, and they shot him. And when he fell, well, then them 2 hand grenades went off. And that's a lot of what went on that. And then I couldn't remember anything. And then this guy in California that was he's in the mortar platoon of my company. And he filled me in all this. And he told me, he said it was November the 22nd of 1967. And I said, well, I know it's close to Thanksgiving. I said, because after it happened, they took us, and the chaplain talked to us, and they kind of sent us out on the in-country R&R to Vong Tau to try to get over some of this. And but I couldn't remember. All I noticed close to Thanksgiving. But I wondered why that, my platoon, and I was left, and there wasn't very few left out of my platoon.
So back then, your training gets you through these hard times. Your faith gets you through the hard times. I mean, how do you get through these hard times as a soldier?
Well, at the time, a lot of the training come in because I know where I was laying, just behind a small dike. I wasn't carrying the shotgun at that time, and I had a helmet. So after it started getting kind of dusk dark, I took that helmet and scratched out as much as I could of the ground to stay behind that, because I couldn't go back, I couldn't go forward, so I just laid there all night long. And but up the evening, I had a little book of John that a girl that I had dated at the time in Davenport, Iowa, had sent me, and it was just the book of John. And I read that, and this was before it got dark, and I wasn't a Christian at the time. And I read that, and I said, Lord, if you'd just get me out of here. But I didn't call upon him for salvation. I was scared as a 19-year-old for, at that time I had just turned 20 in July. But that time I called upon him because of fear of dying. And so I come out of that. And I'd say that's what a lot of the other boy I pulled out that had the testament, like they knowed their time was coming. And but I wasn't a Christian at that time. But the Lord brought me home, and in January 17th of 1971, I gave my heart to the Lord, and He has been a big help in my life when these times come. And then I'm also getting, the VA has been a big help in the last 7 or 8 years.
Well, having been in combat, I mean, sometimes I ask questions about just the kind of like the spiritual side of combat. I mean, thoughts, and I've interviewed chaplains and priests and things, and but does it make any sense at the time, the dying and the death, I mean, all the things happening, or maybe looking back now at Vietnam, I mean, are there questions, or is it just some men live and some men die?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of questions, but these questions, why me? Why, why did I? And the way it worked out when my platoon, it was my platoon that was picked to go out. And there was 2 of us that were going to go down to Fayette. And they got us and they said, your platoon has been sent out to search and destroy the spotted Viet Cong. Said, come, you've got to get back and fly out. So we flew out. And so it just happened, they was a few more feet ahead of me, but I could see everything that was going on, and I couldn't go back to the people that was coming trying to get me out. And then it got all chaos. They didn't know where these others, and they found out that November 22nd, it wasn't 2 or 3 Viet Cong, it was like 400 NVA, a regiment of soldiers. And they was all dug underground in a H formation underground. So what they'd done, they had lured us into a trap. And I didn't find this out until a lot of it in Jacksonville, Florida, that one of the sergeants come up, he said, I know you, because without even looking at my name tag, he said, I know you. I remember the November 22nd battle. And said that, and then there's another article too, the biggest battle since I drank, that they would run into that many.
How would you define combat?
Uh, Kill or be killed, fight for freedom. And sometimes you wonder why you're over there fighting for freedom when we live right here in a free country. But everybody else don't enjoy freedom as Americans do. And the South Vietnamese couldn't have the freedom that they wanted because the North wanted to take it over, and it's communist. And just like America has always tried to help when there's a smaller country or another country is in, we've always been there as Americans to volunteer to go help. And when come my time to be drafted, I didn't question it. I just figured as an American that was what my duty was to do. And I never thought nothing about it. But when I got there, I seen, you know, war it's not like you see on television. There's real bullets and real claymore mines, real booby traps, real stepping over a log, walking point, and maybe see something, or the dog. Sometimes I had a dog that walked with me some. That dog stop, you better stop, because you may be fixing to step over a log, and there on the other side, covered in leaves, is a pit with punji sticks with human waste on it. And you fall into that, then there you are. So, but that dog, they got some smart dogs that walked with us, but they could set up booby traps that you couldn't see. So you had to be watchful.
And walking point, I think, would be dangerous. Isn't that a dangerous thing to do?
It's a dangerous place in a way if you don't watch what you're fixing to step on. But most of the time, and I've heard other point men say too, especially if you're walking single file, like I was when the machine gunner got shot behind me, and there was one sniper, and I didn't spot him. And I walked past, and we was walking on a slick trail with punji sticks made out of bamboo, sharp. And you couldn't jump off to the side. So I walked by a sniper in a tree, and he shot the machine gunner through the straddle. And all I could do, I couldn't jump to either side, so I just laid flat down in the trail and started shooting that shotgun. I wanted to let them know that I had some something to shoot with. So I shot that double-aught buckshot and laying there. And then they come in and hauled him out, and they asked to go ahead. I think there was about three companies of us at that time. And they called and said for to go, saddle up and go on. And I had felt so bad because I had walked past and didn't spot that sniper. And so he said, go ahead. And I said, my sergeant, and I said, I can't walk no further. I said, you need to bring another point man up. And they said, no, the captain, they said, go ahead. So I didn't go. I said, I feel that and then I had got so nervous, and I felt so bad because he had got shot and I didn't. So they brought the captain up, and they asked, and they said, you're disobeying an order. Do you know that? And I said, yes, sir. And so I said, I'll just have to disobey it. He said, you could get Article 15 for this. I said, sir, I can't walk it. I said, I feel that I'll be more of a danger trying to walk up there. So they put the radio, they said, put the radio on his back. Well, all I carried a walking point was a shotgun and a machete, and wore a softball cap. And then maybe a a round of M60 for the machine gunner, and what shotgun shells I used for that 12 gauge Browning automatic. So, and then we got on up probably a mile or 2 miles up that trail and run into them. And then while they was flying out, what our guys had got shot, my squad leader had was sitting with his M60 and had the barrel of it with his elbow, and with them helicopters hovering over the trees lifting the guys out in the basket, he didn't put his weapon back on safety, and it must have blowed some trash or a limb or something, and it shot him through the elbow. Well, they flew him out, and they said to come to me, and they said, "You're the squad leader." Didn't say nothing about no Article 15. They said, "You're the squad leader." So I stayed the squad leader, and then a little bit, it wasn't just a few days, then orders come down that said, "You're buck sergeant." So I got raised from a corporal then to a E5. And then I was squad leader the rest of the time, about the last 3 months.
Did you lose any men during that time?
They was wounded, some wounded, but there wasn't none as I can recall that was killed, because we had run up on them, and the fire was still burning where they was camped there, and pigs, and they shot all the pigs and stuff where they was staying. And then what we found of the Viet Cong that our companies had killed. And then I was walking around there looking, and I found this one Viet Cong and found on him a little brown plastic thing with a razor, and he had a razor blade wrapped in a dollar, like, and it's I believe it's one dong or something that they call it over there. And I had it, and I still got it. And then while I walked on out into the brush, just all of a sudden, here jumped out a Viet Cong, and he was bowing toward me, and it scared me so bad I throwed up to kill him. And he was bowing on his knees and doing like this for mercy. And I didn't have the heart to kill him. He looked like he was probably younger than I was. And I didn't kill him, and they took him. And I don't know whether we usually had interpreters, South Vietnamese Arvins, and they usually would, they'd get some information out of them one way or other. And sometimes it may be to blindfold them, give them a couple licks upside the head to the butt of the rifle, or get them up in the helicopter and hang them out by their feet a little bit. But you pull them back in, they talk. So I don't know what happened to him, but I didn't kill him. And that was a lot. After the November the 22nd, I didn't remember a whole lot. I couldn't remember. I couldn't even remember the men that was in my squad when I come home, and still couldn't. And I found in the attic of my house a handbag, and I found a book, a little tablet that I had of a night when we would march all day hunting, and then we'd dig in of a night, and they'd take you in the middle, the squad leaders and the platoon sergeants and the captain. They'd write they'd give you the password for the night, and they'd tell you, what do your men need, what supplies, who's going to be in what foxhole. And I had wrote down there their names. Some of them were nicknames, but some of them I had most everybody went by their last name. Well, I had these little square blocks with like Rittenhouse and Lee and McKinney, diff ones, and I had their names down there. Well, that kind of brought back some memory to me. And then I run up on, like say, Orlando Salazar website, and he posted, he found out I had a lot of pictures. And Roger Hoosier's that got killed right beside him, his wife had sent me this camera, a little 110 Kodak camera, and he got killed 5 weeks after we was there.
He's the guy you talked to about earlier, the first one you got.
Yeah, and she got to writing me, and she sent me little boxes of goodies through the year, and she sent me a camera, and that's how I took all these pictures. And but I wished I had wrote names. Some of them I've got wrote on them. It says me and a buddy, or downtown this little village. But I wished I had wrote their names, but I can't remember their names.
So again, what happened after November 22nd that you couldn't remember? Just the incident that happened?
Yeah, I couldn't remember. I just know that something happened to my platoon, and there wasn't but just a few of us left. And I remember them taking us back, and the chaplain talking to us. And they sent us to, I believe, I've got some pictures of where I took in Vong Tau. It was what they call an in-country, R&R. And it was mostly to try to, I guess, to get our mind off of what had happened. And there was a couple of us went there, and I stayed a week or so to try to, I guess, to get this off of my mind. And then I went back, and they put me back with my unit and right back into the same thing. And then was getting close to the Tet offensive. So I moved from Fayette to Bong Song. And I was in Bong Song, and I had 2 more days left. And they said, well, this is as far as you're going. Said, we're not going to take you any further. Said, you got 2 days, we'll fly you back to Anke. And we got on Anke and got us on the plane. There sat, I think about 5 of these guys that we've got buddies with in basic training. There they sat on the plane, come home, except for one, Larry Sexton. He lived in Sneeville, Tennessee, and he was killed. And which Roger Hoosier was also killed. But here's some of these set, and that was a big, surprise to me, and something good come out of it. And now to beat it all, we come home, and we worked it. We got together, and we were still had 7 months in the Army, and we stayed at Fort Campbell for a while, and then Fort Gordon, and then. When we got discharged, we ended up, 4 of us working at the same place, at the Eastman, and we've all retired from there now.
What should our country remember about Vietnam, Dean?
I think if you're going to go in to a war, you should go in with prepared to win it, and not let it drag on and say, at first, they told them, said, don't shoot until you're shot at. Well, you don't go into a war and let somebody shoot at you and then shoot back. And that changed after a while, but I think when the United States goes in to a war, they ought to go in and say, we're going in and win this war and get these people out of communism or whoever it is, like Russia trying to invade part of Georgia now, to take that back. If we was to go there, we should go there to try and say, we're going to take them, put Russia back where they belong.
Why did you want to talk with me today? I guess you found out about my work, and And why did you want to talk?
Well, I haven't talked any hardly. When I come home from Vietnam, you didn't mention that you've been to Vietnam. People didn't want to hear it. I called when I arrived at Tri-City Airport in Sullivan County, I called my sister and I said, I'm home. My daddy and mama didn't drive a car, never had drove. They come and picked me up, brought me home, and you didn't say nothing about it. I didn't want to talk about it. Not really that I didn't want to talk about it. Nobody didn't want to hear it. So, and people, like in the airport, when you come in, if you had a uniform on or something, they didn't look at you like they do the Iraqi guys coming back now. And I've been to airport some here lately, and I'd see these Iraqi men and women come in, and I walked up to them and welcomed them home. And they said, sir, I appreciate that. And that made me feel good at what they had done. But it also, you know, took me back to when I come home, they wouldn't have welcome home, you know, as a group, like World War II. They come back as a group and they had the big parades. But I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it to my kids when they was little. And but like right now at the VA with post-traumatic stress, and I talked to it more about it in the last 7 years. And I've got a group that I'm in at the VA, 14 of us. We talk about anything, what we talk about stays within that group because we've all experienced the same thing and we can talk to each other. And I meet twice a month.
And my first Vietnam film is being used by the VA as a tool to help those that are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorders. So I'm real glad about that. And then the one that you'll be in is my second film that I'll have out next year. So the veterans that are watching this that have PTSD are feeling like it's okay to talk about it because they're hearing others talk about it. So that's an interesting thing that's happened with that film. So
Yeah, that's what I have suggested to some that I've met, the Iraqi soldiers that's come back, to not, you know, you may feel all right then that there's nothing wrong, but down the road, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what happened to me, keeping this all inside for 30-some years and not saying nothing. I may have said something about, you know, my tour, you know, going here, but as far as dying and seeing your buddies die and, you know, and see people laying there like a burnt charcoal log, that'll get on. It may right now, it may not seem to bother them, but down the road, when you're waking up of a night and sweating and nightmares, it never goes away. Your brain, God made something there that no computer could contain all the memory. You know, you talk about a computer having all this memory, but that brain's got a memory up there, and it records everything. But then there's a lot of blanks in it, and I believe God left them blanks out for a reason, because I don't believe I could, at the time, that I could have handled it without some help from the VA and the men that I'm in the group with. And I'll be in it, I'll be 4 years in December.
what does the American flag mean and represent to you as a veteran?
It represents, to me, something that we look up to. I've got one flying in my yard right now, 20 foot high. And it's been for years. As soon as it starts to fade, I change it. And it's something, and when I see it, I want to put my hand over my heart or to salute when they call, to stand. And it bothers me that our young people, it don't, when they call to attention to the flag before this, they don't pay no attention to it. There's a lot of men died for that flag, just like I believe the ones that died that is trying. They got the big monument and they're trying to get that flag up. But flags means a whole lot to me. I have got probably about 5 flags right now waiting to be taken somewhere to be burned, because I usually, I don't throw them in the trash, even though they're frayed on the end or discolored. It means a whole lot. It means freedom. Something that a lot of men died, not just in Vietnam, World War II, Korea, back 1912 or what the war there, that different wars. There's a lot of men, and then here the last few years and wars, women. A lot of women has went through a whole lot too, and I think sometimes our women is not mentioned. They'll say our men, and every time I hear that, I say our men and women.
And I'm doing a film someday on women in war, so I've already collected a lot of stories, so that's something that I want to address, and I agree with you. We're almost out of time. I had a couple follow-up questions here. Well, obviously you're proud to be a Vietnam veteran?
Yes, sir. At first I didn't say a whole lot about it being a Vietnam veteran, but since I've been getting help, and I bought caps that says Vietnam veteran, 1st Cav Division, which I'm proud to be in, General Custer's old unit. I'm proud to, and I have wore that cap out some at places, and I've had more comments, and people come up to me and say, thank you for your service. And these are young people and some older people. I've had more thank yous in the last 5 years than I had in 30-some years, because it'll be almost 42 years that I've been home.
Makes you feel good, huh?
Yeah, it does. It makes you feel that even though we pulled out and the North took over, that we did accomplish something. And I don't think it was all in vain.
Tell me quickly about the price for freedom.
There's a lot of sacrifice. It's sacrifice in lives, families, the wives, the children that are left behind to defend for themselves and their kids while their husbands, especially right now in Iraq, that they go and they stay 15 months. They may get to come home 3 months with their family, and then they're right back, going back on another tour. It's not like it was in Vietnam. When your 12 months is up, you come back. But it means sacrifice, and I think your family, a lot of our American men and women's lives, just like Roger, that he had just been married a few months before he left, and then got killed about 5 or 6 weeks after we arrived.
Have you been to the Vietnam Wall?
Yeah, about 2 or 3, I think 3 times.
What about the first time you went? What was the emotion that you experienced there?
It was just a reflection to the way I looked, and I was going to look for Roger's name, Roger Hoosier and Larry Sexton, and our pastor's wife's brother's name, and my wife's half-brother, and to make that rubbing on there with the papers, and we rubbed the names. But to look down, and then the hat shaped in the V shape, And to imagine how many lives was taken, you know. But these guys and men and women had mostly draftees, which I know there was a lot of volunteers, but because I even had one in my squad that volunteered to come from Germany to come to Vietnam.
I think we've pretty much covered that. I've been to the wall. It's an amazing thing. It's reaching out to you almost.
Yeah, it is.
Did you watch the Vietnam trailer on my website by chance? Do you remember watching the Vietnam trailer?
I've watched, I know the World War II, and
there's one on Vietnam too, and I actually produced a music video at the wall with some veterans I took back last spring, and that's on the film too. So, but
I watched some of the songs, and I think my daughter, some of the poems, and
good.
but she's the one got me to by a local television broadcast about your, and she emailed me this, and I looked through that, and there was a lot of stuff there that I could connect with. These other veterans are talking and stuff, because you can't just go out and sit in Harley and talk to anybody, a civilian, or what I would call civilian, but another veteran can understand. And I know you've probably heard so many stories that you feel like a veteran if you're not already, because you've probably heard so many stories.
I've done almost 600 interviews in 6 years.
Well, that's why I say
You're right. I feel like a soldier, a Marine, and a sailor, an airman,
Yeah.
Coast Guard, the whole bit. And I've never been in combat, but I've come pretty close to it, talking to people like yourself. So.
Well, I've been able to talk about it more in the last 7 years than I had in a long time. But it's through talking to other veterans and sharing and actually breaking down and talk about it. Things that I'd never talked about, that I couldn't talk about without actually breaking down to, I couldn't get through it. Or if I did talk about it and really brought out the real stuff that come out, my insides would be so tore up, it'd take me 2 to 3 days to get over that, because it just felt so nervous, quivering inside. But like I say, I've had a lot of help with the VA.
Good. You were a little nervous to talk today. How do you feel now?
I feel kind of tense and quivery, but
well, you did a good job. You did
yeah.
very well. Hey, see, have you heard anything new today, or was this things you've heard? Yeah. So that's good.
I've talked to my kids later, and they couldn't. My son couldn't understand why I wouldn't own a gun. There's a lot of veterans owns guns. How I don't own one and don't want one in my house.
That's all right.
And that's just how some are.
The last guy that was in here, he sleeps with a gun still.
Yeah, there's some.
Keeps the light on, doesn't like the dark, doesn't like the night, has post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's amazing. All these years later, they carry this around. So, but we're done with this part. I want you to stay there for a second. I'm going to take a picture of us with this camera,
Okay.
and I'll probably have your hat on for this.
Okay.
Picture.